Well, thank you for joining us today. This is the panel for Using AI for Transforming Financial Services. My name is Dina Blikshteyn. I'm a partner at a law firm of Haynes & Boone, specializing in intellectual property and also artificial intelligence. Joining me today, we have Saima Shafiq, who is a Senior Vice President and Head of Applied AI Transformations at PNC, the bank that operates in 27 states and District of Columbia. We have Sena, who is a CEO of Aiera, a leading earnings transcription and monitoring platform. And also with us today is Gannatti, who is a global head of research at WisdomTree, a global financial innovator specializing in exchange-traded funds. Now, you guys are all working in the AI space. Can you tell us what products do you do with AI? Let's start with Saima.
What products do we do with AI? Well, we do all kinds of products. So Saima Shafiq, as you mentioned, from PNC. My area in AI transformation is for the corporate, commercial, treasury, and to some extent the retail and asset management as well in terms of building the AI applications for them. And the AI products or the applications that our teams build include document AI solutions, machine learning solutions, conversational AI solutions, and now the generative AI solutions as well.
Ken?
Sure. So we live stream the majority of investor events, so earnings calls, sell-side conferences, even many macro events, so FOMC, FDA, and then we apply our language modeling to that. And as part of that experience, we can offer summarization, question and answer, topics, really give the listener to these events the opportunity to interact with the event while the event is happening or after the fact. And it also helps us extend the individual from the standpoint of building monitors to track various topics that they could be interested in so they can learn about various conversation that happens halfway across the globe. And we can help them build those monitors actually using LLM technology as well. Is my mic okay, or is it's kind of getting a little loud?
It's a little low.
It's a little low, you think?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I speak softly, so now I hear it.
So Chris, how about you? How does WisdomTree use AI?
So, well, one of the things I was excited to be on the panel with Ken, because we do use Aiera to help us ingest. We have to ingest a lot of information because we're building exchange-traded products across Europe and the US, covering almost every asset class. So the more information you can ingest, the more efficiently, at least in theory, the better product ultimately that you can build. And then we're using, like I'm sure many companies, different cybersecurity packages. We're using different sort of sales contact management packages, like your Salesforces of the world. And what you're finding is all this software that you're using anyway is incorporating AI into it in more and more unique ways. So I wouldn't say WisdomTree is famous for building AI. It's more we're a user of AI, hopefully to make more secure, more efficient, better products.
Can I add on to that too? And it's been interesting working with WisdomTree, and they've helped us actually understand our product better because we typically had thought of ourselves as supporting the fundamental investor across topics and discussions that could be happening, and working with WisdomTree and seeing how they were able to set up monitors and actually track a lot of this information in real time, and then give teams the opportunity to review that information and then tweak and then essentially bring it back into the experience. It really has helped kind of open our minds to how you can bring fundamental analysts and quantitative analysts together in an experience using these tools.
But Saima, what about banking? How are banks using AI, not in the financial services space?
Yeah, so broadly, I think not just banks, many organizations, but I know particularly for the financial services and banks, we break down the AI application in 3 broad groups, starting from customer experience, the most important thing for every organization. And then I can go down into the individual use cases or different types or categories of use cases within that domain as well. So customer experience is one pillar. Another one would be cost reduction, where you want to gain operational efficiency using automation and AI. And the last one would be revenue generation. Naturally, you would think the most heightened focus may be on revenue generation, but it is interesting to find, based on the technical feasibility and the business value that we can provide, most organizations, especially large that have done a good homework and due diligence in doing the technical feasibility analysis and the business value analysis, they do prefer to start from cost reduction initiatives, and they are mostly working in the customer experience standpoint side by side, because your speed to market for customer experience related use cases would be slower, just because of the extra rigor that you have to perform in terms of your risk and legal and all of the compliance that goes with every word that you utter in front of the customer, even if that is through an AI tool. So these are the three broad categories, as I mentioned. And then if you wanted to correlate them back with your, let's say, customer experience kind of use cases, you're thinking about conversational AI, customer assistance, you're thinking about the survey analytics, you're thinking about customer lifetime value analysis, you're thinking about all of the opportunities where you can make a recommendation and improve the customer experience even from a servicing standpoint. When it goes to operational efficiencies and cost reduction, you're talking about back office, middle office, front office kind of optimizations where you are enabling your assistants, your employees that are servicing your customers in a much faster way, leveraging the AI technologies. And the last one, in terms of revenue generation, we're talking about cross-sell and product recommendations, customer personalization, and really understanding the data and details about the customer and their preferences, so you can give them promotions and offers and recommendations based on what they like to see. That's where banks would prioritize.
So what about challenges? I mean, AI is pretty big. Everyone are implementing AI. What are the challenges that you're seeing in financial services? Let's start with Gan.
I would say the biggest one, which has been an issue, we've been working in this area for about 5 years, and it's consistently accuracy. And that's both in terms of live transcription, making sure that if you're providing summaries, that the summaries reflect the content that is spoken within the discussion. Same if you're providing answers to questions that are being asked. And there's different ways that you can mitigate that. But I think that's generally the hurdle to wider adoption right now within our industry, is gaining confidence around that accuracy.
Saima?
So I can open a long list of challenges because we have to deploy applications around all of these pillars. I would say, starting from data wrangling, data gathering, then of course imagine you have all the good data and now you are required to build a model or implement a solution. Do you have enough ground truth to be able to validate what you have implemented is good enough? Then you would going from lab to production. That's your machine learning deployment related challenges. So data to begin with, ground truth collection, then deploying and having the pipeline, and of course a lot of times those who are experts in the data, the domain experts or the subject matter experts and the business specialists who know how good your solutions are, they are not the owners of your DevOps pipelines or machine learning pipelines, and the infrastructure capabilities are always sitting in a separate organization, and you are just another request in the work queue a lot of times based on how the organizations are structured. Additional challenges would be, of course, around explainability of AI. If we think about the generative AI kind of use cases, think about the times when you would be asked to explain how the language model came to a conclusion and gave you an answer, and that explainability and all of the model risk governance and model risk management kind of challenges would come in as well. So I think the last one that I would want to call out is, imagine everything worked out in your favor. Imagine you were able to get the data you wanted, you got the ground truth, your model is performing great, you were able to integrate it with a good application, you were able to put it in front of your end users, and they are now able to leverage your tool. If we are talking employee-facing, let's say internal use cases, are they willing to adopt, or are they too scared that they will lose their jobs? So that's one of the biggest challenges to overcome when it comes to adoption of AI as well. If you cannot put in the right strategy for adoption of your AI use cases, all your investment can go down the drain. So you have to be really thoughtful about that.
So Sam, I'm glad you mentioned adoption. How do you get users to adopt AI? Because there's so many wonderful products on the market, and in the previous session, we heard that 80% of them fail. So how do you make sure that your products succeed?
Yeah, I think it starts with picking the right use case, first of all, picking the best use case that you know, where there is business alignment in terms of what you are looking to deploy. And then starting nimble, being nimble the whole time, making sure that you are prepared to start small, deploy something meaningful, but be prepared to really come up with a fast follower whenever an enhancement or an iteration is required. The day you go live, people may be super excited the night of deployment. The sentiments the next morning can start changing. And as they see more and more realities of things where AI is not fully prepared to deal with the production data, it is very easy to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the customers on day one, and that's exactly detrimental to what you want to achieve in terms of adoption of the use cases. So think small, be very crisp and clear in defining your scope. Let's say you're launching something and people are thinking this experience is going to give me all my answers or most of my answers. Be very transparent if you are limited in scope. If you don't set the expectations right, you are setting yourself up for the failure. So being crisp and clear in your scope and making sure that the end users who are going to use your product are understanding of the scope and how it can extend and expand in the future is important. And as I said, be nimble, be agile, be prepared to have frequent releases, frequent enhancements right after, and have a long roadmap with very structured, bigger and smaller milestones along the way.
So Ken and Chris, both of you sell your products externally.
Yes. It's
what
a little
are the
bit
challenges there?
It's a little different, I think, because we're not a traditional consumer model. We're not an ad model. So I think that, from our standpoint, we're enterprise. So private data is private to our clients, to our institutional clients. So we're not going to think about using their data to personalize or anything else. I think that generally the challenge is trusting the result. So making sure that, the transcription is accurate and it's a source of truth. That if you're going to provide an answer, you're going to provide a summary that it is, bulletproof. And I think that's what's challenging still about these models, because it looks so real much of the time that it's easy to think of it as an alternative to the way that analysts typically do their job, and that it could be coming for them. I think in truth, many of our users are actually embracing of these services. They want to be able to trust these services. They want to be able to extend themselves and in different ways, and these tools can allow them more time to do that. But if they find that the answer isn't the answer that was expected, or it's not the one that is truly what maybe drove the stock price reaction in the event, then they're going to question it, right? And I think that's going to be a barrier to adoption. So helping them gain trust, improving the accuracy, that's an important part of it. They'll understand pretty quickly if this makes their job easier, and they'll want to use it. Becomes very sticky then.
Yeah, at WisdomTree, working with Ken, working with Aiera, has been good, because we sit there and if I want to understand better what's going on in a portfolio of 70 stocks, it's very difficult to try to read 70 earnings call transcripts, digest 70 different sets of financial statements. Remember, memory is also a very useful thing that a lot of these systems provide, where if you could quickly search pieces of information because a client is asking a question, why is this stock in there? What was the performance? What was the rationale? If you don't need to have it always in your memory, but rather you could search the answer, search it very quickly like these systems can do, it's very useful. But ultimately, WisdomTree is only ever selling an investment vehicle. So if the investment vehicle fits the client need, that's the only way we really make any revenue. We're not directly trying to sell AI to an end user.
Right. Ken, any tips that you can share with us about how to make AI trustworthy and how do we know that it creates the right result?
Yeah, so for us, we spend a lot of time on scoping to the actual source itself. And I think that, we have our own large language model that's specifically trained within how investors, how issuers, companies speak to their investors. So that certainly helps. But also in addition to that, trying to scope the summaries, the Q&A to the actual event in question so that a user can go back and quickly tick and tie what's being said to help build that trust. I think to accept an answer as fact is a bit risky. And I think that we all learned that when we saw the hallucination, et cetera, that's happened and continues to happen out there. So I think companies who are using these models have to be, very careful, not just in terms of, what they're trying to, respond to, but as far as the scoping, but making sure that there's also citation and there's a way for users to be able to quickly find that source material themselves so that they are still the ones who are making the ultimate decision. And I think about, the space and people, will get nervous about ChatGPT, OpenAI, et cetera. None of us have our money with them to have them invest our money right now, and same with Google and Amazon and many of the others who are very focused in this area. You're still investing it with those who you trust because they have a conservative approach to how the decision should be made to invest your money. And I think that winning them over currently and as they go through their assessment process on how these tools can apply into their process is it's a great experience because you actually realize sort of it's where the rubber meets the road in terms of what's valuable and what's not. And ultimately you're working together towards, like we're doing with Wisdom Tree, working together to find something that is truly scalable. And I think it certainly, with what we're seeing in the space, I think, there is the risk that you're moving, humans in the loop, and then ultimately they become on the loop because they're sort of monitoring, and then you ultimately move them out of the loop, right? So there is definitely a risk between passive and active investment in the space and what this could lead to. Risk, I would say, more for active investing. But what I think that does is it creates a responsibility for them too to come up with truly creative investment processes that justify the fees that they're charging those whose money they're investing. And I think it creates a great opportunity for companies like Wisdom Tree and others who have a more passive approach, but who are trying to leverage these advances into that approach as a way of working harder for their consumers, their clients.
Saima, how about you? Anything that you do to make AI more trustworthy, that your users know that it generates the right result?
Yeah, I think it would start with making sure that you are getting diverse data and you're not limited to potentially already biased data. So that's where you would start. And then, of course, in regulated industry especially, the focus on the model risk management or the governance process around any model that gets deployed ensures that we are not putting into production anything that can have a potential risk of any slight chance of bias.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about legal and compliance. We all know financial services is an incredibly regulated field. Does it hurt AI, or does the regulation actually help AI? Who wants to take that one?
I wouldn't say it hurts. I think it, in a very manageable way, it sort of controls or puts the balance around the benefits of AI that we can use. In the regulated industry, they are regulated for a reason. So I think it's not necessarily hurting. It's just sometimes slowing us down a little. But at the end of the day, they're protecting us. So I think the legal and compliance routines and policies and procedures that we have to follow from an AI implementation standpoint should give an added level of confidence to those innovators or AI implementers or passionates who want to put something in production, that I can get as creative and wild as I can. I know there is somebody on my back supporting me and ensuring me I'm only doing what is permitted, what is safe and secure, it is not going to hurt my customer, it is not going to hurt my employees. So I think they should take the benefit of the presence of the regulations instead of considering it negative.
at WisdomTree, I'd sort of think of it as there's sort of your high risk and your lower risk types of data. There's a reason we work with Aiera, and it's been great to do so. First of all, they adjust and they're very responsive to questions. Secondly, the type of data they're dealing with is publicly available. So if they or we mess up the interpretation of a financial statement or an earnings transcript, that's not great, but it's also not illegal to mistakenly interpret publicly available financial data. That's what the market is. People will look at the same information on the same company. Somebody will go long, somebody will go short, and ultimately we'll see who's right over time. Where it gets trickier is, so WisdomTree deals with clients in Europe, in the US. All these markets have a different definition of privacy. I lived in Europe for the last 5 years, so they were just rolling out the GDPR regulation. And if you see what that's like and see what operating, if anyone here operates internationally and you see what you have to do with that, and then you come back to the US, you end up thinking, wow, the US really doesn't think about privacy. I mean, I know they do, but in a comparative sense, there's this sort of spectrum of how different markets and countries deal with data privacy. And if you start to interact with people and employees and clients and customers in all these different countries, you really see, and that it makes sense to have these differences in view and regulation, but you have to always think every step of the way, are you complying with the appropriate rule in the jurisdiction where you're trying to operate?
Maybe I would add, because I think your question also is just, is it a good thing or a bad thing for AI? I think my own thoughts on it would be that there's a geopolitical consideration also that, when you say it's good for AI, good for development of AI, which carries its own risks, I think, for individuals, humanity, et cetera. But when you think about our country leading in AI, do we want to have the regulations that might slow down that development? And are we then, is it still a level playing field for our companies and for for the work that we're doing within it? And so I think it's a challenge to say, yes, I think overall you see a lot of folks coming out and saying we need regulation. And I think if you can have regulation that's across the board, I think that's terrific. And you just want to be maybe sensitive to it as far as how you think about where it's applied.
So before you mentioned that you all use data to train your models.
Yeah.
Are there any privacy issues that you see with getting that data?
We leveraged open source models to a large degree in building our own. And I think that, you've seen some changes as far as folks saying, well, we want to understand the source material that went into leveraging those models, especially when they're being commercialized, so that you have opportunities to litigate, et cetera. You have some companies like Meta who've kind of shut down and said, listen, we're not disclosing it. So, it's kind of, we have enough public data, it's in our walls, it's ours. Zoom, most of us probably recently saw that they came out and said, if you're using Zoom, your face, your voice, your words, they're basically ours, for as long as we want them. And so I think there'll probably be some shifting within how companies and individuals maybe think about their personal data or their company data as these communications are happening. Yeah, I don't know, did I get all the question there, or yeah.
What about looking at the other side of the spectrum with Saima? How do you know that your user data that you use to train models is private and stays private?
Well, I think in our case, we are only dealing with the open source models where we know that the benefit of those open source models is limited to the understanding of the language and not necessarily leveraging the contents part as much, because very carefully the use cases that are selected to be implemented are vetted for particular, contextual questions, let's say, which would rely on some context provided by the enterprise data. So the open source models may be leveraging a whole bunch of internet data, public data, but we do not use anything that is not commercially licensable. And with those, we do have the transparency of what was used and how safe and secure it is for us to use it and how explainable we can make it. But when it comes to really marrying that together with the enterprise data, we know that nothing is going right in front of the customer without an added layer of human review. And even as a part of building the solution, the context is provided, and most of the use of language models is more contextual than just open on the internet data.
So someone on the panel mentioned that the data is biased. What do you do to combat bias in data?
So take that.
Well, I could start maybe. I just have a few thoughts on it. I think that I was a sell-side analyst, research analyst before starting Aiera, and we go back to a lot of our clients, a lot of our institutional clients, and I think in the beginning they would say that this solves bias, right? And I think that the problem though is getting them to embrace it. They want to see their own inherent biases within the output, right? And they want to make sure that it passes what they think is the correct answer as a way of building trust in it. So I think it's a challenge to say that these, are a solution to bias when, humans are still the ones who are measuring the output. I think it's probably at some point when you pass to the chasm to like the decision point, and humans are not in the decision, where it starts to maybe be more or less biased.
Yeah, and realistically, if we think about it, all the data that is used for training any models across the globe, you are leveraging the data that was created by human beings, and if there was bias in that data, there is no way you're going to clear that out. Mm-hmm. You cannot possibly find out a diversification way to remove bias if everybody who's producing the data has that inherent bias. And the more scary fact around this is, even if you are, let's say, saying, I'm going to produce synthetic data now, how are you creating the synthetic data is also leveraging the similar data that existed with some potential bias that sits in there, and you're only training your routines to create more biased data. So, if there is bias in the system, in the people, I don't know how AI can really solve for that, unless we really remove the root of the problem. And that eradication is not going to be as easy as long as human beings exist.
All right, so let's talk about ChatGPT. Do you guys use ChatGPT in your products?
No, we don't use ChatGPT. We have our own large language model. For certain use cases, we will find that GPT-4 performs well, so maybe a variation, ChatGPT. And so we have used that, but I would say that we're not using it in the way that I think consumers are thinking about it. The big difference for us is that if you'd ask, like for instance, if you asked ChatGPT a question about an earnings event that happened today, you'd get an answer from 2 years ago explaining what an earnings event is. You're not going to actually have the actual answer provided by ChatGPT. So from our standpoint, we like that we provide our own model, to our clients, and we can make our adjustments to it, et cetera, and continue to improve on it. But where we find that our model isn't delivering as well as GPT-4, we do have a fairly agnostic approach where we bias just the output for the client to make sure that there's no trade-off there.
So in our regulated industries, of course, the use of ChatGPT would not be permitted for the most part, as you would expect, and rightly so. On the way to this trip, we were thinking how many speakers up on the stage would have collected some information on their topics of conversation from ChatGPT. I don't know how many, of course, hopefully 3 of us have not. But that's how people are using it, right? For preparing their contents, for reviewing their contents, for, resume writing, for the annual reviews, writing for their teams, performance reviews and whatnot. A lot of things, countless. I know everybody, based on their industry and their profession, they are leveraging ChatGPT, at least in the personal space. Professionally, within the enterprise boundaries, we do not use it, but we use the equivalents, like Ken mentioned. The equivalents are good in the sense that they allow us to use the models at GPT-4, GPT 3.5 kind of performance level on our enterprise data. It's good, it's awesome, but it's not a magic bullet that you can ask any question anytime and always get the right answer with the consistency that you would expect for an organizational solution. So there's a lot more homework that goes in making your GPT-like solutions production ready. So instead of just getting super hyped up about, hey, ChatGPT or GPT-4 and beyond can solve all of my problems, we should start thinking about how are we going to put in a process to benefit from what it can offer, because it still needs human layer of making it more useful.
And I mentioned it from a product standpoint, but also from a developer standpoint. I know that it's being used to assist in time to market and just making sure that we're moving quickly. And so that's also a very interesting area of development within the company.
I'd say we do more with Aiera because ChatGPT was this catalyst. Everybody now at WisdomTree, you don't need to convince them what AI is, because like any business, there are all these people that are not technologists, and maybe they control the money, maybe they're looking for certain results. And before ChatGPT, if we said we want to work with Aiera, they might say, why would you need that? Just read more. It's easy enough to do summaries. But ChatGPT sort of brought this idea of automated summarization of information to the masses. And then you then see all the holes in the 2 years and all these things. And you basically evaluate better other packages, other use cases of these types of systems and data.
Thank you.
So what's next? Where do you think AI technology, or Gen AI even, will go? Let's start with Saima and go down the line.
Sure. I think the Gen AI, especially within the organizations that are forward-thinking, they are going to make a drastic change in the workplace, right? I mean, there will be changes in how we operate, how we perform our functions day to day, what applications we interact with every day. I mean, I know many of us are already seeing these, automated recommendations when we are using Microsoft Teams and Outlook, automated responses and so on. So it has already started changing and shaping the way we work and how we are becoming more efficient in our work. But I want to call out one thing in regards to generative AI, and similar to other AI projects as well. The technical talent that organizations need for being successful in the generative AI space is going to be the same. You have to understand the language models, you have to have the ML engineering capabilities, you have to have the full orchestration or pipeline set up so you can benefit from the models in the most seamless way with your existing applications and interfaces. But where organizations will succeed or will thrive or will mature with the use and adoption of generative AI or large language models will really heavily depend on which executive leadership groups or domains or the senior leaders from business segments are more interested in making an investment now versus a couple of months down the road, because it's all about the partnership between technology and the business that tells you where you can mature, because wherever you start now, you were hearing about this earlier today. If you cannot deploy a solution, a generative AI solution within an hour, you're too late. And then we were given grace. Okay, let's make it 24 hours at max. Within generative AI, you can solve problems within 24 hours. And so those leaders from a business and executive standpoint, if they're not partnering up, technology teams cannot go much beyond. So maturing in that space is really, wake-up call for many of our tech leaders.
Well, the holy grail, or at least seemingly within investment management, is can the computer actually select the assets and trade in and out of the assets without a person even needing to do anything, mitigating bias and being tired and emotion and all of that. We feel that could be a long way away, with the exception of certain firms like, say, Renaissance Technologies that has clearly figured out something along those lines. We were speaking with a Wharton professor, basically doing research on the idea of, can ChatGPT or GPT-4 select stocks. And he said something very interesting. He said basically he can only test the capability from 2021 onwards, because when these systems are trained on the entire internet, if you say wanted to test it further back, it's possible the system within the training data knows the movement of the stock price. So you wouldn't necessarily be seeing if the system is coming up with a reasonable prediction, you'd be seeing the system access information that's included in the training data. And so what he's been able to test so far, and it's been, you know, it's sort of, we're at a casino right now. So it's sort of like, are you better than 50-50 odds? And so far on daily price movements, where you over 2 years, you have a lot of days, on daily price movements, it seems like there's evidence mounting that it could be better than 50-50 odds. It's better on small cap stocks versus large cap stocks. So it calls into question whether you could actually execute some of the trades, because sometimes on small cap stocks, they're not very liquid. So if you've got a small amount of money, that's one thing. If you're trying to manage a hedge fund with $1 billion, that's something different. But the journey that we're on is how do you generate better returns over different periods of time? And large language models, maybe one day, or some extension, that maybe the next thing, not a large language model, but the next development. A year ago, we didn't even talk about large language models to anywhere near this extent, so it's still early days. Maybe the next thing is what can do a better and better job at investment management.
Mm-hmm. When we started Aiera 5 years ago, we actually provided recommendation, and it was a difficult thing to sell, because you're selling it to institutions whose jobs are to come up with recommendations. You're getting very close to the product that they sell to their customers. And so we quickly pivoted about a year in to the transcription, event monitoring, business that we're still in. But when I think about those models, it wasn't recommendation in the way that I would think of equity research. It was really sentiment, right? And it was, just quickly providing that response. And I think today, even if you were to ask, an LLM to do the same, it's kind of a variation on that, right? So what I think happens going forward for the industry, and I'm kind of scoping the AI question again to financial services within maybe, investment management. You're going to have companies who want to have their own in-house models. They're going to want to make sure that they're leveraging the first-party data sets that they have from all the proprietary research that they've been able to build over the years. The access that they have to third-party data sets, the differentiation around that, the additional breadth, that's going to become very important to how their AI model performs relative to the next firm's AI model. So I would think it kicks off a bit of an arms race around, further development in this area, further access to data, and making sure that, it's not a one flavor sort of fits all, because that's not how the market is going to respond. You're just going to have something like we've seen where algo trading sort of goes haywire, and you see kind of the mix, you see the misses of that, right? But ultimately, we've grown, I think, as an industry to put some checks around that, and I think ultimately, the same experience will play out again, but with much more data.
So the takeaway is we will be able to use LLM models to buy and sell stock, but not yet. So right now I'm standing between you and lunch, so feel free to go. But before that, a big thank you to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nina.